On today's Newsmakers, real-life exorcisms, end times prophecy, and a Columbine survivor speaks out. That and more coming up. Welcome to Newsmakers, a show where we go behind the headlines each week to bring you interviews with pastors, entertainers, politicians, and other notable news figures. On today's Newsmakers, we begin with a look at Bible prophecy. Make no doubt about it, wars, rumors of wars, famines, earthquakes, Middle Eastern chaos, the list goes on. Some people out there are wondering if we're watching Bible prophecy unfold right before our eyes. We are going to welcome today Jeff Kinley to the show. He's an author who tackles these issues regularly. With no further ado, let's welcome Jeff to Newsmakers. All right, so as we're recording this, there was an earthquake in New York City. We've got chaos going on in the Middle East. I mean, there's a lot happening in the world. But before we get there, what does the Bible tell us when it comes specifically to the signs of the end times? What are those?
Well, Jesus in Matthew 24 lists a ton of signs that will precursor his second coming. And it basically mirrors the book of Revelation, the first half of Revelation. And in those signs, you have, Billy, things like wars, you have rumors of wars, you have famines, yes, earthquakes. And then Jesus said all these things are merely the beginnings of birth pangs. And so I think what Christ is talking about in that passage, Billy, is the actual end times, the actual tribulation period. However, these things that we're experiencing right now, I think are sort of a ramping up to Revelation. I mean, you think about an earthquake, which you just went through. The walls are shaking. I mean, everybody's like looking around going, did you feel that? And guess what? I mean, we're looking around our world going, hey, are you feeling this? Are you feeling these signs ramping up? Because they're everywhere.
You know, one of the things that is happening in this Israel war, and it's kind of been bizarre to watch, and it started in the beginning. At the beginning of the war, we saw people on college campuses. We saw people sort of defending Hamas, or at least being very pro-Palestinian before we had any idea of really what had happened. That had already started. Now we're watching the world sort of turn on Israel a little bit and say, hey, the way you're handling this isn't good. You need to pull back. There's a lot of different opinions, not just in the populace, but among world leaders. And I know we have to be careful with how we talk about that, but how does that sort of fit in with what we might see in scripture, maybe in books like Ezekiel? Is there anything, in prophecy that might align with maybe some of what we're watching right now?
Well, I think so. In Ezekiel 38 and 39, Ezekiel prophesied thousands of years ago about a last times or last days invasion of the nation of Israel from basically most of the Muslim nations that are surrounding her right now, including Turkey and Iran, including Russia coming in from the north. And so we know that invasion is going to happen. It's going to happen in the latter days when Israel is feeling secure in the land. Obviously, she's not feeling secure right now. But I think the pieces of the chessboard are being put into place with Iran, with Turkey, with Iraq, with Russia even coming south with assets in Syria. And these proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah of Iran, are just simply kind of paving the way, if you will, if nothing else, Billy, stirring up dust in the region to get the sentiment to go against Israel. It's been well said that if Hamas laid down their weapons today, there'd just be peace in the land. But if Israel laid down her weapons, she'd be eradicated and wiped off the face of the earth, because that's their stated goal. And so, yeah, there's been a lot of protests against Israel, people saying that they don't have the right really to defend themselves. But it's hard for us, I think, as Westerners to wrap our mind around the fact that if you're a people group, if you're a nation, you're a tiny nation, smaller than the state of New Jersey, you're simply trying just to keep yourself alive. And these threats to peace, these threats to her very existence, I think are what justify her being able to fight this war.
Well, final question for you here, and I appreciate you breaking this all down and helping people understand. You have a couple of books that I want to focus on briefly here. One is God's Grand Finale, Wrath, Grace, and Glory in Earth's Last Days. That book, you deal with Revelation and a really powerful text that people can grab and read. What can you tell us? I don't want to spoil it, because I know when a book is a little ways off, but The End of the World According to Jesus of Nazareth, that one is coming out, and it deals with a lot of what we're talking about here. What could you kind of tell us as a little preview for that book?
Yeah, basically, if you want to know what happens in the end times, why not just go to the very one who's in charge of it? That's Christ himself. And so this book, the gospel, excuse me, the end of the world according to Jesus of Nazareth, basically helps us see through the eyes of Jesus what the end times are going to be like. So he details it in great specificity, and it's a very exciting narrative. And it's answer to the question when his disciples said, "When you coming back? What's the sign of your return?" He says, "Watch this," and he gives them this whole Olivet discourse. So that's what the book's about.
Well, very good. And people can go and check that out and also grab a copy of God's Grand Finale, which has been out for a while now. It's a great book. Jeff, as always, appreciate your time today.
Billy, thank you so much.
You can get Kinley's books, God's Grand Finale, and the soon-to-release The End of the World According to Jesus of Nazareth, wherever books are sold. We'll be right back in just a moment with more Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. Our next guest is Ryan Bethea. He is the host of the Exorcist Files podcast. Now, Ryan tells life stories, real life stories of demonic possession and healing, and he's gearing up for the second season of his podcast. Again, it's the Exorcist Files. And so with no further ado, let's welcome Ryan to Newsmakers. So Ryan, the Exorcist Files, an incredibly successful podcast series. You are moving into the next phase, a lot of really cool stuff coming. We're going to get into all of that. But for those who don't know, they're not familiar with the Exorcist Files, what in the world led you into this world of evil and the demonic?
Well, I don't know if I'd characterize me personally journeying into the world of the evil and the demonic. There's a statute of limitations on any actions undertaken, as you know, Mr. Hallowell. But I would say I started this with much more, we'll call it lighthearted desire to document what I'll call metaphysical phenomenon so that people in Los Angeles and SoCal don't think I'm immediately crazy. I've always been fascinated with just the idea of like, what are those crazy coincidences or miraculous answers to prayer or even just healings? Like, it's rare. Like, I don't want to mislead people to thinking that like I've seen hundreds of people healed of crazy things, but you know, there's a lot of cool things going on that can't be explained in our world. And that was, you know, my sort of pillars are just what's real and what's ridiculous. And those two kind of fit that. And so I actually got to go and meet some people at the Vatican who walked me through and said, hey, look, it's going to be a little tough to get some of these medical records. And as you know, they have a whole process for documenting healings as part of their saint canonization process. So if you were to be considered for sainthood, which I'm sure your application is still pending, you would have to have 2 miracles associated with your name. And they have doctors, evidence, I mean, they throw out almost all the claims because they want it to be real. And when it is real, it meets a really high threshold of evidence. And that was awesome. But unfortunately, you know, medical records are understandably, and frankly, it's good that they're hard to access, right? And so the individual I was working with said, you know what, I want to introduce you to, in the meantime, to a guy who we send sort of many of our top most difficult cases for in spiritual warfare. And of course, my producer went, interesting, I should talk to him. Needless to say, I met an exorcist, and you have to ask him to tell you a few stories. And after that, I said, I think we have a show here. And here we are.
And the rest is history. You know, so in this show, you guys do incredible dramatic reenactments. I mean, there's a lot happening in this show. It's not just an interview show. You really sort of pulled all the stops out and put this together in a really compelling way. You know, you went into this, obviously, you mentioned a little bit more lighthearted in that sense of, you know, and intrigued, though. You wanted to know, you wanted to understand. How did season 1, putting those stories together, being sort of at the center of creating these narratives, how did that change you or impact you?
Well, the moment we hit record in this monastery, when we started recording, the power went out. And I remember Father Martin's just had a kind of smirk and goes like, hey, welcome to my world, right? So anyone who's done, I will say, look, this is going to sound nuts, but this should fit right in with your regular scheduled programming. But I have to say, the amount of people that I've talked to who work in just paranormal or, you know, super or spiritual warfare, or even attempting to document this, the signal and the noise, for, you know, a bad pun, there is so much tech failure that happens. It was absolutely, you hear stories and you're like, oh, whatever, not going to happen. And sure enough, we had power go out a full episode disappear off multiple drives? I mean, just, again,
wait a minute, what were you thinking? What were you thinking when those lights went out? Like, there you are, you're about, like, here we go, we're starting this up. You hit start, you go, and then that happens. Like, what was going through your mind in that moment?
So you kind of sit back and you go, okay, this all seems very, very strange. And you kind of just go along with the flow. And then at a certain point, enough things happen where you say, okay, I think something interesting is happening here. And if you believe in the Judeo-Christian narrative, right, if it's true, right, it's funny. Everyone's comfortable with guardian angels and it's fun to swap stories, touched by an angel, etc. No one, of course, referenced touched by a demon.
Touched by a demon, yeah.
Which nobody did not come out, thankfully. But it's funny. If it's true, right, it's like, hey, then these other things exist. And guess what? And I'll say one thing I smile at. I get so many emails from people saying, hey, if I listen to this, will demons show up in my house? And I want to say, if it's true, right, then, and you are a Christian, then you were already under attack the moment you were born. So there's not like, it's an insidious lie that you can't even learn about it. And I think some of these little things that happen kind of fuel that myth. So yeah, I kind of raised eyebrow.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, as we sort of look at the different stories and the different narratives that you encountered and that you're going to obviously encounter in season 2 here, what for you, well, before I even go there, let's talk about churches, because it feels like you guys on this show are talking about a topic that some churches don't talk about at all, right? And that's interesting to me. We see Hollywood even, and they're not necessarily doing it from the right theological lens, but they're talking about a topic more than some churches are. Why do you think that is? Why do you think there is this, and maybe you'll disagree with me on this, but this disconnect between many churches on this issue?
Yeah, it's interesting. Last year was kind of the year of exorcism. There were so many exorcism movies, right? There was Nefarious, there's The Pope's Exorcist. Our show came out. There was a conference called SatanCon, which I blissfully did not attend. And I do wonder who sponsors that. Like Duraflame, is it like it's a lot of fire products? I don't know. But no, it's interesting. And I don't know. I think if I had to guess, a lot of it comes from probably that trend towards like a liberal, naturalistic interpretation of the Bible that kind of crept in the last kind of like 70, 80 years. And Father Martin's joked that at one point there was like Father, Son, and Holy Counselor, right? There was, or like counseling became like the new exorcism, and this idea that science solves everything. And that really played up in the West. It's interesting. You travel the world, and in a lot of different countries, right, the idea that the supernatural is very real. This is not a controversial topic. It seems to be more in our sort of Western postmodern world. But I find it interesting because a lot of churches don't talk about it. And Jesus spent, you could argue, a fourth maybe of his time. It's well documented in the Gospels. In fact, one of the first, encounters with Jesus in the temple, you have a demoniac manifesting in the Jewish temple, which I thought was really interesting. And so I think we kind of ignored our own peril, and like a lot of things, it probably just became taboo. I don't understand, though, because many, many people are totally open to angelic intervention in their life. And yet you mention the word evil spirits or demons, and suddenly people get very nervous. So I do find that sort of dissonance very interesting.
Well, listen, I love it. I appreciate you coming on and talking about it. It's the Exorcist Files. Again, where can people go? What's the link? Give it to us one last time.
Go to exorcistfiles.tv, sign up for our Kickstarter, pick your reward, and we will say, verily you shall have your reward. And please, exorcistfiles.tv, available on all podcast platforms. Download it today. The power compels you.
Oh boy. Great place to end. Ryan, appreciate your time today.
The spin stops here. That's what we like to say.
Find out more about the Exorcist Files at exorcistfiles.tv. This is Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. For our final segment, we're sitting down with Columbine survivor Craig Scott. Now, Craig is going to be talking about the 25th anniversary of Columbine, which just passed. He'll also take us through his experience that day. With no further ado, here is Craig Scott. Craig Scott, we are at the 25th anniversary now of Columbine, an event that you survived, that you went through, and that you very beautifully over the years have spoken about sharing your experience, your sister's life story, and so much more. Thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely, Billy. Great to be on with you.
So I want to start just as we're at this marker, 25 years. I imagine in a lot of ways you can't imagine or believe how fast that time has gone by. What's going through your heart and your mind as we've hit this anniversary here?
Yeah, there's a lot that's gone on in my mind. I've been thinking about what to say even for the last year, because this I knew was kind of an important marker for me personally. Just 25 years later, I've dedicated a lot of my life to sharing my sister's story, my story, and traveling around and speaking. My family started an organization to share the life and legacy of my sister, and we've impacted millions of people. We became the largest school assembly program in the country. You know, immediately after the shooting, I did this interview with Katie Couric, and she called it her most memorable interview. I was with my friend who was killed next to me, Isaiah, and his dad. I was with Isaiah's dad, and it really, you know, I realized early on that a lot of people saw the news media and, you know, saw it as invasive, but I didn't see it that way. I saw it as a way to get out a message and a story. So from early on, I had this belief that that God had a plan and a purpose for the worst tragedy in my life, and that belief, whether, you know, if somebody believes that or not, that belief has been one of the biggest helpful things in my journey the last 25 years. This belief that God has a plan and a purpose for even the worst stuff that I go through.
I want to ask you something about your sister, because you've brought her up a couple of times, and your sister, many people know her story. Some people might not, but your sister, obviously, she lost her life at Columbine. She was killed in the midst of all of this. And so when we talk about forgiveness, understanding, you just shared the horrific thing that you went through, right? And then on top of that, the loss of your sister. I mean, there's multiple layers here. What would you want people to know? We're at this 25-year anniversary. Your sister has had a massive impact on a lot of people's lives through the books that your parents have written on her. But what would you, and a film about her, what would you want people to know about her?
Well, she had a prayer in her life, and it was to be used to impact people and in a positive way. And she wanted to start a positive chain reaction. When she was 13 years old, she traced her hands like this on the back of an old dresser and wrote, "These hands belong to Rachel Joy Scott and will someday touch millions of people's hearts." She kept a lot of journals. She had 7 journals at the time of her death. And she's become like a modern day Anne Frank. There's thousands of kids every year that do book reports on her. There's quotes of hers on the hallways in schools of hundreds of schools right now. Muriel's made. So she's become this role model of kindness and compassion. I believe her story, Billy, will be one that lasts a long, long time. And it's we've put it into the school system, and she's a wonderful role model. And, you know, her story has literally saved thousands of lives. I have a book here at home of 2,000 of over 10,000 emails from kids in a 2-year time period that heard her story and took time to get on the website and write and say, her story saved my life.
I want to kind of bring it back to you, because you have gone through a lot over the last couple of decades. What has been the toughest issue for you in light of what happened at Columbine to move past and journey through?
My biggest issue has been that I have made my identity, my whole identity sometimes, about what I do and about my past story. I share about it a lot because it's tied to my purpose, and I want to make a positive impact through that. But I'm not my story matters. Your story matters, but you're not your story. You have a past story and a current one happening right now. You have a future story, but your story is like the journey or path that you're on, and you're the person on the journey. but that journey is not you. You are more than that journey. You are an eternal spiritual being. You're more than your body. You're more than your brain. You are a spirit, and that spirit was given to you by God. But so for me, not getting trapped in the past, you know.
Yeah.
Can I end with my favorite poem?
Yes, you can.
That has been very helpful for me in my healing process. And still, it's crazy, but there's still things that we all need healing from. I'm still getting healing even to this day on some things, but the poem is called In the Quiet. And it's in the quiet, I find peace, where the outside noises cease, where my mind has settled down and my thoughts no longer race. In the chambers of my spirit, I have found a secret place. There the unseen things embrace me, the invisible that's real. And we there enjoy the treasure that activity would steal. Hear the whisper of the poets who have beckoned us to know of that inner sanctuary where we seldom ever go. In the quiet of our being, creativity is born, and it rises to the surface to a world that's hurt and torn. Deep within me, love replaces all the anger and the fear. In the stillness is a knowing who I am and why I'm here.
Well, Craig, I find you inspiring, and I appreciate you taking the time and joining us today. We'll have you back again sometime soon.
Thank you, Billy. Love you, man.
Find out more about Craig and opportunities to bring him to your community at craigscott.org. We'll be right back in just a moment with more Newsmakers. That's all for Newsmakers. Thank you for watching, and be sure to head over to the CBN News YouTube channel. That's where you'll find the full interviews that you saw on today's episode. Plus, you can check out our new daily Newsmakers podcast. It's Monday through Friday, one interview every single day. You can subscribe to your favorite podcast platform there to find our show. It's also called Newsmakers. As for this show, we'll see you back here again next week.